flag,
I,
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
thank you. It is Wednesday, April 25th. For the record, the Finance Committee does have a quorum this evening, and we will be having a presentation from Dr. Bayetta on the schools with the three articles. And I think we can begin with that.
Good evening, all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening. I'll undertake this in the order that you have it in the printout. Some of it is repetitive information that you've received. Some of it is new in terms of the latest information on the articles being forwarded for the annual and then the special within the annual. The hot off the presses is the beginning stages of the MSBA window project. As you know, we began this process last year. This is a 55.63% reimbursement from the state. It is currently a project that is looking at the 3 elementary schools. You have a handout with the 38 pages worth of colored pictures and proposals and so on and so forth that makes for excellent reading during the hockey game tonight. But in general, as you all know, this is a $8,476,971 project. It will not come in that high, in my opinion, because there are things here that, like we did with the high school project in its infancy stages, we have to roll back. Making sure that you recognize that 55.63% or 55 cents on the dollar is a reimbursement on eligible reimbursable costs, which are determined by the MSBA and not by us. That is in the process right now as well. What you're looking at is a breakdown for the Yale, the Salmonese, and the Norse. This is all exterior doors and all of the windows, and it does include child-safe or child guard glass in the first floor of the 3 schools. So these are glass that are not breakable, penetrated in the main areas by things like a gunshot, for example. They eventually are, but they are what they call child guard safe. They are not ballistic safe, so don't, because that will just take the cost to a whole nother level. But they are have been improved in the MSBA project, and we would be one of the first school systems actually to have that as part of an MSBA project. So I think a lot of that has to do with what's taking place in the world today, the violence that we're seeing, the issues that we're seeing around gun violence in schools. Of concern is that our schools really don't have traditional enclosement vestibules. So that is one of the questions that is costs in here, but we are trying to figure out from MSBA if that is an actual reimbursable item or not. So that could be an item that comes in and out, flows out of this project, depending on what the final cost of the actual project is. So that's what I mean about eligible costs. The concern that we have is if you look at the LGN, for example, you have total glass, 1 main door entrance, right? So the idea there is that would go to safeguard glass all across, and then the secondary part becomes what kind of a vestibule system that you put in there, which is estimated as part of this cost. And do you do one? So a vestibule concept is a little bit like the Yelp. You walk in, or even the JCS, you get buzzed in the first door, now you go through the second door. What would actually happen is you would get buzzed in, then you would get buzzed in a second time. So that the idea is you have a 2 process. You can be enclosed into being let into the building and then having to be let in a second time, if you will, through a buzzing process and locked door process. So that's what I mean about a vestibule setup within each of the buildings. Yes, ma'am.
So in the vestibule concept, would the person entering the building be able to interact with the people in the office, for example, without being buzzed through that second set of
Correct.
doors
So you're
to
looking
access
at,
the rest of the space?
right, so now you're looking at video potential. The discussion we've had in Wade is here. The discussion is, do you find a way for internally to be able to develop that window process so the person just comes around and says, hi, how are you? They see your face, or are you using monitors that could be the secondary thing that we have to do instead.
Okay.
Okay? All right, so to be quite honest, as you know, when you look at these, if you look at any of the presentations that are before you with the PowerPoint that I've copied for you, I know that Mike, my color copy is better than Mike, so I decided to do this for Mike. What you see is deteriorating windows that are allowing water to come into the building. It's that simple. The JCS project would literally give you a full envelope of that building. New roof that was put in 13, 14, and now new windows and exit doors. So you're looking at a lifespan of that building now expanding beyond your HVAC system, heating system. That long term would have to be looked at. At the LG, you're looking at your septic system's been improved, as we know. You're looking at windows and doors, and then you're looking down the road at roof in that building. And then the Yale, you're looking at a roof that's actually in good shape. So you're looking at probably some of our biggest issues. JCS has things like replacement of windows that were replaced interiorly with wood. Well, we know that that's not the way to go, but at some point they were remedied through that. Part of this project also includes, it may have to be scaled back depending on the final price, is some of the mortar work around those windows. Some of that may be something that is, depending on the final cost of the project, we have to scale back where we do what we have to do, but then the actual facade of the building is done, extended later on. The building committee on Monday the 1st, I think it is, will actually have our consultants come out who are the OPMs on this project and the architects, and they'll do a full presentation to the building committee on the 1st, the school committee on the 7th, and they'll be available at the town meeting on the 14th as well. So for folks to ask further questions and have further detail. In trying to keep the excitement of windows and doors, because we're all so excited about that, the issue here comes down to what is the available funding to make sure that your buildings long-term are feasible and don't become a hindrance to you. And at 55.60%, which is actually the highest reimbursement we've seen in a project, it's difficult to not get into this accelerated program process. Timeline on this is literally a positive vote from you folks, building committee, selectmen even, town meeting, school committee, and then finally the town meeting to borrow, which would mean the project going out July 1st, and would literally mean that we're looking, I believe, at the spring of 2019, having all 3 buildings begin the process. These are companies that are used to, and these projects are used to, being done while school is in session, as well as during the heart of the summertime. Of course, they'll try to push the agenda in the summertime, but it will be done while school is in session. They'll work around all the dates that we have to work around with second shifts and all that stuff, but in general, these projects are done while school is in session. We're actually going to be visiting a school that's actually undertaking this type of a project right now. That's the general scope of this article and what it means. The positives, if you look at it, or the negatives of a project like this, is that you have to be concerned about ADA compliance, hence the reason why your cost is a little higher than what you might think. Once you get to certain barriers of cost, you must, by federal law, you must look at things like the height of the water fountains in the building, the bathrooms in the building ADA accessible. You don't have a choice. In other words, when you start to spend to a certain valuation, you are, and this project represents that. The lucky part of us is that we don't have any major, like all of a sudden, removal of bathrooms and additions of bathrooms. We have switchings of bathrooms and walls and piping. That's part of this. But that's, again, not us saying let's fix bathrooms. That's, you have to do this when you get to projects of this size. As you know, the full cost, projected cost, is what needs to be voted, and then the reimbursement is just like the high school process. It's every 15 days or so through the process. That would work through, I believe, Link's office, and then through, I believe, the town treasurer's office, or town accountant's, town treasurer's office, I believe it is. So that's the general thoughts.
Yes, Mike?
I'm assuming all the windows and doors are original to the building, is that correct?
Yeah, we have portions of windows that have been, partial windows that have been replaced throughout the years, but we don't have any building that has brand-new windows from A through Z.
And I don't know if there's ever been any study to show the energy efficiency of the existing ones?
So the energy of, well, when you can't put up a window in the summertime because there's no screens, or when you are putting all kinds of tape around them in the wintertime to keep the heat in, that's just probably anecdotal evidence as much as I can give you. We didn't undertake a study of the actual savings, although it is, the architects are telling us it's going to be a good long-term savings for us.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's a small amount, there will be
Right.
some savings.
Yeah, we will see some types of savings, and I know Mike's been doing a lot of work with utilities. Actually, we've worked together on trying to save some money through utilities, and we've seen our utility costs in the last few years actually kind of line out. We're not seeing these $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 increases like we did the first and second year that I was here, even though those costs continue to increase. When you have a new roof on a building like we do at the JCS, and you have, as you see from some of the pictures, literally gaping holes and where water can get in, we know that this is going to envelope that building pretty significantly. The JCS is a perfect example, just because it has a new roof that's only 4 years old.
Okay, thank you.
Doctor, what's the warranty on this product? Its materials?
We haven't gotten to that stage, but that's part of the process that MSBA requires, is they have already, so the accelerated process already puts us into a requirement that MSBA will only allow. So I can't tell you today if it's 20 years or 25 years or 50 years, but they will only support this based upon the product that they have already approved. The only change to our product that we're requesting is that we are continuously, I don't know if you've noticed, putting ACs in classroom windows. I don't know if you've noticed that throughout our elementary school. Since I've been here, it's got to be at least a half a dozen or a dozen since I've been here. Those are all related to IEPs for students who, because of medical needs, require air conditioning. So we have classrooms that are being set up that will already have that facade, if you will, that it just needs to be popped out and replaced with an AC unit, not necessarily cut out, which is what we have to do now. That's the only major change. Included in this is also the specs of some of what it would look like, what the new idea would look like. So, for example, windows that are very much pushing out instead of pushing in terms of safety, not only for the students. You don't want windows coming in that are at this level for elementary students, because that's where they're at. So these are windows that are pushing out. What type of security in terms of locks are in these, and then included in this is also all the shades that go with it. So that's not a secondary price, that's part of the whole process. So the entire windows are dumped, new window goes up, that includes the shades and color coordination. None of that's been selected, but we're going with pretty basic.
Joe,
Yeah.
does this company, do you now have to go out and get an architect to oversee the job, or do these guys?
So right now, we're literally ready, it's ready to go, ready to roll. So MSBA's, the different projects, that's a great question. The difference between this and the high school project is you had to go through all of those steps. This project now is including the architects have already been through every single building multiple times. And that's the great thing about the accelerated program, is they say, that's your OPM, that's your architect. You need to get the money from your town meeting or your process, and it's already in play. Everything is pre-selected for you, which cuts back about, I don't want to lie, but at least a good 6 to 9 months of a typical project. That's why they call it accelerated project design.
Aaron?
Hey, Joe. So the safeguard glass that we're going to be using, it comes at a greater expense. And did I understand you correctly, that the state may or may not consider that a refundable?
They will refund that. We've received verification that they will refund that upgrade to that glass.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Which is a fantastic thing. My biggest concern, to be quite honest, are open space areas. I think of the open area at the LGN, right at the front. I think of the cafeteria at both the Yale and the JCS that are like just windows galore. So that when we started to look at this project, I said, what do we what do we think about this? Is it, because this is a potential long-term solution for the district and for the town. Because it is something that folks are really looking at going forward in replacement. Almost everything, I'm working on another MSBA project, non-MSBA project for a school as a member of the board of directors for the Reads Collaborative, where we have students that are involved with Reads, and their project for a new school down in Middleborough is looking at making sure that they have the child guard windows, which work in the ways that, we want to get as much protection as we can. At the same time, we want to have windows that are breakable going out, right? Because we want to be able to, in this day and age of our training of students with our ALICE program, where we're potentially breaking down the window to evacuate the building or evacuate that classroom. So that's the nice part about these types of situations. That's what I have to think about when I'm looking at these projects. How do we keep X out? And oh, by the way, how do we make sure we can still get out?
Paul?
So the final completion, if I follow you correctly, would be in September of 1919.
No, yeah, 1919, we were both there. The idea would be that the project would start in the spring of 19, and the projects, the goal of the project is for them to come in and out as fast as possible. But you have to remember that weather and all of that is an issue. The biggest issue with new window projects, the biggest window, is the turnaround time on delivery of the actual windows.
Yep.
That is the biggest issue with this project. Getting them up and getting them down will not be, I mean, it's a significant project, but the issue is how many windows, what type, what size, blah, 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 and ordered in a way where you don't have this 6-month waiting gap for the next group of windows to come in. That's the biggest issue with window projects.
Walter?
Are we going to lose any square footage of window area as a result of this?
No, we have really tried to take a look at how much natural light can come into the building. That's part of this process, and part of what the architects delivered to us is making sure that natural light is still part of the process within reason. But no, we don't see ourselves losing more windows because they're blocked off in any way, shape, or form.
Other questions? Okay.
Okay.
Great.
So on the next memo that I gave you, this actually is a memo that I sent to Mike and you folks in the Board of Selectmen on the 5th, and I'm using the same one only to show for the record. I just want to go that thank you for the support of the Article 1 at the special town meeting that we just had for an old bill that has been approved at the 11th of April's town meeting. If you take a look at Article 2, I'd like for you to, this is the FY18 budget, and I'd like to refer you to the handout that I gave you that looks like so. It's attached to that as well. This is the actual breakdown of cost for how we are in this $395,000 situation. And I want to particularly, we have these placements here, which identifies all of the placements in general that we have, including our summer-only placements and costs. And you'll note the dates that these started. So, for example, you have the first one, October. If you skip over the summer only for just this discussion, be mindful that we carried over $200,000 in special education, right? And we did that for two reasons. This is my 5th year here, and this would have been my 5th year where we hadn't even used $150,000 in excess money to those accounts. So if you look at these, you'll see that 9 cases currently, from going back as far as July of 2012, we have currently 9 cases being budgeted at $100,000 or more. As a matter of fact, at a range of $103,000 to $230,000 per year. In particular, if you start to look at the dates on the left-hand side, placement number 9 in March of this year, placement number 10 in September of this year, placement number 14 in January of this year, placement 22 in January of this year, placement 28 in October of this past year, where this is where we started to see the issues in the fall that led to a budget freeze in November. Placement 29 in March of this year, placement 30 in January of this year. On the second page, January 26, placement 34 of this year. Placement 38 in September of this year. Placement 51 in September of this past year, this current fiscal year. Placement 52 in February of this year. Placement 53 in January of this year. Placement 54 in September of the fall. Placement 55 in the fall. Placement 57 in the fall. And then placement 60 in March of this year. If you look across at some of these numbers, you'll also see in the prior handout that was given to you back in the memo, you'll see an increase of $79,000 in transportation that goes with this. And so this is the reason why we've requested support for this supplemental budget. Yes, sir.
Yes,
I
Tom?
have one question. I see there's an August of 2004. Does that mean that particular placement number 45 has been in the system for 14 years?
That's correct. Remember, we are aging out students until the age of 22, right?
Okay.
So if a student comes to us in preschool for preventative, we've absorbed that cost, whatever that is. So let's say we have an unfortunate child who's dealing with a wheelchair, has to have 24 surveillance, if you will, or a person with them. You're picking up that every single cost. And that student is at our cost until they age out at the age of 22. Right. So while you have students mostly aging out at 18, if you will, a couple of kids at 19 if they're repeating, most kids right at that 17, 18 cusp, we have students whose responsibility is ours until the age of 22. Our latest 22-year-old student was last year, and that was at a cost of over $300,000 a year for, well, at least the 4 years that I was here. I know that's what it cost. So now, as you know, the circuit breaker concept comes into this, which is the first $40,000 we absorb, and then you get whatever the state's reimbursement is. It's supposed to be 75. This year they funded at 65. It looks like they're going to go to 72. By the way, we'll talk about that as part of this, as was asked by the chairman earlier to me at the start of this meeting. So, and then you absorb that total cost. Here's the surprises. Since the last meeting that I was here, we received what's called a cost share. You'll see a number in here, and I didn't circle it, and I apologize. I need to put my glasses. Link helped me out on the total on that one. The cost share that just came in. I believe it was placement 9. Yes, placement 9, 23rd of March, at a cost share for now of $10,286.40. So we're cost sharing that for the remainder of the year with someone else. DCF, another town, any of those combinations. Take that call, will you? So when you look at it, this is the things that destroy our budget after a Maytown meeting and it's approved. We carried over what we predicted and has been happening for a number of years to us. And then we were eating crow, for lack of a better word, in terms of that decision that we made. But on the other side of it, it's what do you do? How do you just leave a certain amount of money here? Now, what we have done, so that you know, it's my understanding that on April 9th, you folks voted our budget for this coming year at a $760,000 increase. $300,000 of that is in special ed tuition. And I'll tell you why I've already had to do that. Because if I know that I'm $395 in the hole, I better put at least $300,000 into next year's budget for tuitions. Originally, I had $200,000. We increased it before our budget proposal to you to $300,000 because we have to absorb some of those costs next year already. For example, what is the cost share for next year? Is it $50,000 each? Is it $25,000 each?
Yeah.
Those are the things that because this is just for the remainder of a year. So then that really leaves that, of the $764,389, that $300,000 line leaves us with $464,389. And then you know that the requirements I have in special education come up to leaving us with about $260,000 for the general education population in Norton. That's where our budget is as this plays out. Now here's the good news as requested by the chairman at the beginning of this meeting. Circuit breaker, as per communication through Mike's office, my office, with the elected officials, has been approved at 72% from 65%, which means about $104,000. The question tonight before you is, are we, that payment will not come into the school department until the fourth quarter, which is June. So the issue becomes that we have to hope that that 104 is coming in. So you could take a vote that takes 395, let me just get the right number. Takes the 395, 374.42, and take 104 off that, and now that gives you what your remaining balance would be that we'd be requesting. If it doesn't come in, then we're back here to, I guess, discuss it further. But that would be after a town meeting and all that stuff. My confidence level is, as anything, typically lately, it's come through. This does not address any placement between the day that I'm speaking with you tonight and the 30th of June. Just putting that on the record. This is a huge issue in the Commonwealth. You remember Barry Nectow, our former business manager that many of you worked with on the building committee for many years, and so on and so forth. His community that he currently is living in has a $830,000 shortfall. Okay? And they just went through this process and are getting, having to go through the process of taking from one line item, and I'll give you a perfect example. You supported a $100,000 line item for materials and supplies in the fall. I froze that in November after I started to see, we haven't ordered those. This number includes taking that type of money completely out of the budget. We are literally down to contractual services, meaning personnel services that we owe, or any costs that are fourth quarter costs or monthly costs of transportation and tuitions to schools. That's what we're down to for the rest of the year. So it could be worse, I guess, but I guess it could also be better.
Yes, sir.
For the school, for these costs that are broken out, these actually invoiced costs or?
Sure.
So
No, these are actual tuitions. You see the daily rate. This is what we're paying out on literally a contractual or monthly basis, depending on the format that we have with the collaborative or the private school.
So when you get one of these placements, it goes through the process. Does it line out the responsibilities?
Oh, sure.
of
So,
each entity?
oh, sure. So I could say to you, BICO Collaborative, student starts tomorrow, it's $145 a day, and they're going to bill us monthly. And that's how it goes out for every single. So these are actual numbers and actual students encumbered numbers.
Okay. So you can actually tie these back into some documentation?
Oh, sure.
So-
They're all not only documented, but they're in some cases within, Link, you can correct me, with the private schools, we actually have contracts. Yeah, we have contracts for every single one of those.
45 contracts
Right.
and each one that comes in, we do the same. So yeah, we can tie every single one of these numbers
Right.
back.
So are these costs fixed for the current year, changeable?
Yeah, so this is current year,
Yep.
and then the collaboratives have informed us of what their increases are. They usually tell us that by May. We've been using a 5% increase in our budgets. Private schools, we've seen as much as 20% increases in 1 year. The other thing that I think is important is a reminder that things like 45-day placements are not reimbursable in terms of the circuit breaker process. So if a 45-day placement for a student costs us $18,000, that doesn't go into circuit breaker at all. Doesn't meet the requirement of the 40,000 to even be looked at. So you got to have a bill that's at least 40 before you can start looking at getting 65 to 75% of something. The other thing is, in our budget for next year, what we've done, which is what we've done every year that I've been here, and I think before I was here, which is, you'll see that 300,000, and we just have it as a fictitious hold, if you will, for any changes in collaboratives or changes in a student going from a public to a private, and there's an increase, or the reverse. The great thing about this is that students do move. The negative is that the price can either go up or go down. It all depends on the scenario of the needs of the student. Okay?
Any questions? More questions? Yes.
On June 30th, the end of our fiscal year, if you don't get the 395,000 plus or minus whatever you think we may get back, you will be in default.
Correct.
You'll used all your money, and they're gonna be coming after us
Correct.
for 395. Okay.
Yeah. This is, this is one of the, so this actually speaks to an article that we're proposing that I don't know how you folks feel about it, but this is the way that folks are going. Everybody's trying to stay away from the surprises. So tonight I have $300,000 in that account, right? Throughout the year, I'll do even a better job of communicating to you that 300,000 is down to 190. That 300,000 is now back up to 210. That 300,000, we can do that. That's easy for me to do through Mike's office and get it to you. And as the budget process starts in January, you meet in the fall, I can provide that information the same way that I've sold to Mr. DeLuca and you folks that I would provide what are our summer changes that have taken place. So we don't think we have 38 new positions. And just everybody has the same information.
To follow up what Tom was saying, so this could be a negative, could be, I'm just saying the 395 doesn't happen. But what about in general, the 27,235,000? Is that forecasting after 10 months, you level spend it out, expensed, or?
In terms of
Just
our overall
the
budget?
budget, yeah.
So most of our budget is encumbered. 81% of our budget is encumbered on July 1st because of salaries and contracts and positions. The fluctuation is really in our special education budget throughout the day and throughout the year, transportation. That's where we have most of our flexibility. My proposal for this year has us cutting materials and supplies line items again. So, I guess, let me answer your question this way without being, inappropriate. The days of saying that school budgets are $27 million and you got $25,000 you need at the end of the year to just figure it out, they're done. They've been done for actually quite a while, but here in Norton, this is a perfect example of how it's done. I mean, if you say tonight, we're not going to do 395, we're not going to do 200, we're not going to do $1, then I have no idea what to do except personnel, which means I guess I'm shutting down something somewhere because kids are going to be sitting without teachers. That's where's the cost come from? Where it's I hate to equate it this way because people don't like it when I do it, but it's really not much different than all of a sudden you have a situation where your overtime account just balloons because of things that happen. This is almost the same scenario, except in a worst case scenario. This is the perfect storm, and I hate that title, but it's the perfect storm for Norton. I haven't seen this in your history. In terms of all of a sudden, 8 students are costing you significantly much more money for placement. I have to educate them. We have to educate them. They have a right to that education. And we do a pretty good job, but there are certain situations where we have to send students out of district. And most of it is around social, emotional, and behavioral learning. And it's climbing. People don't believe it, but when you have pre-screening of students not on an IEP, and you have 10 students in your building who are pre-screened for suicide prevention, that's a pretty big deal.
Yes.
And those numbers are climbing. It's where we're in. This is not a Norton phenomenon. This is in the community I live in, other communities of my employees that are here tonight, or anyone else that's listening out there. It's happening all over the Commonwealth. To be quite honest, all over the nation. Just pick up a paper and you're going to be reading about it. Mr. Chairman, if you'd like for me to move to the next article.
Finally, Steve?
So this year, we're looking at 60 placements. You had to go back the last 3 years. What were those numbers?
So 60 placements. Remember, these are shifts in placements as well, so 60. So we've been hovering anywhere from 38 to 60. Our true placement increase for this year is we've gone from 38 to 44. Okay? So that's where you have that true number of the 395 negative comes from that.
Yes, Marty.
You mentioned the transportation was 79,000.
Right.
Is that included in the 395, or is that an addition?
Yes, it is. Yeah, in the first memo that was sent to you, I don't think I have it with me, but again, dated in early February. I think it was sent, I know it was sent to everyone, but it explains specifically at the bottom the same 390, generally the 395, and then, and that's a perfect example of you're budgeting $79,000 more just for transportation. That's the equivalent of, 1.25 teaching positions in a position that's, a master's 1, 2, 3 area. Okay. We've spoken about the Article 3. Again, Mike, I don't know how these are going to be numbered. I'm sure they're different, but at that time, they were my Article 3. They're probably your article, something else.
26.
I think your Article
Okay.
26 is stabilization.
Right.
Is that the one?
Okay. So when you look at the Special Education Stabilization Fund, this is the single most significant request that you can see from town to town this year throughout the Commonwealth. And I know that from talking to a recent meeting of Mass Association of School Superintendents. The idea behind this is to find a way to stop as much of a surprise year as you can. To be quite honest, Link and I and members of the school committee had talked about this last year before we even had any of these situations. So I don't want you to think this is just in response to our situation, although it comes into play. And the article is pretty clear that it's established under Chapter 40, subsection 5B, which basically means that the school committee is giving its authority away to town meeting for the purposes of using the funds that will be in that account. That's not something that typically happens, right? So that's why it's called a specialization account. There are communities that have had it for quite a while, in other words, 5, 6, 7 years, and have had to use it. There are communities that established it, haven't had to use it, and have accounts that are as much as $1 million or more because they've earmarked, focused on funding. In our case, because of the way, and I could be wrong, I'll defer to Mike, it seems to me that everything comes in under the general fund, and then it's line itemed underneath there, I'm going to guess. The question would be, what are the types of funds that you would look like that come from that? And, we've made a recommendation on one of those thoughts. One of them is the Medicare Reimbursement Fund, which is at about $230,000. That's due to be quite honest, my administration's viewpoint that we should go after those funds. When I was here, we were getting $60,000 to $80,000 when I first got here. Last year it was $200,000, and I'm sure Link has it, but it was $239,000, and I believe I actually saw it on a printout that you had here for one meeting. So is there a potential that we could have a discussion that those funds, which are collected via the school department employees, filling out data points for a third-party company who then fills all of the federal paperwork and state paperwork to get reimbursement back to the community. So that's how that process works. I provide OT services, PT services, speech services, whatever it is, services. Even administrators get surveyed. It's an actually online survey that can come to anyone versus the ones that you have to check for students that they pick for you to do. And then that gives you kind of a general number. That's all audited. And then that third party goes into a billing process with the feds, and then that's how you get your funding back. So that's one way to take a look at it. Another way is just quote free cash, which is where Medicaid reimbursement goes into now, which eventually goes to town and schools. So again, I just reserve the thoughts on that to you folks in terms of how you think it should or shouldn't be done. Mike and I really haven't had a discussion about it in terms of the specifics. I think we'll probably do some of that too. But I'm worried about out-of-district placement with increased student behavioral, social, emotional needs. I'm very worried. And I'm very worried that a year from now, after having $300,000 put into that account this year, and you folks coming in with $395 minus, let's say, the 104, if that's the route you take, that I'm having the same discussion with you a year from now. That's my concern. So start it with something. Potentially, the idea behind this is to utilize it when we need to, and so that you're not just going back into another reserve account or slashing and burning somewhere else in order to offset the costs that we try very hard to control, but in some instances, it's completely out of our hands.
Paul?
So this stabilization account, in reality, would be really to deal with special ed issues?
Only. So this would be an account that, let's use this year as an example. Let's say we had $500,000 in that account, just for the sake of, the last 5 years, we were able to put $500,000. And all of a sudden, I came before you and I said, we've zeroed out line items, we've encumbered all of our requirements that we have to. The state's given us the 104, we're $205,000 short. We would make a recommendation to you folks, that recommendation goes to town meeting, and through the typical process, and town meeting would have to vote as per the stabilization regulations to move that money into the special education of the school department. It's the only line item that town meeting would have a specific vote for. As you know, right now, town meeting can only vote on the bottom number. They can't vote on the line item. In this case, they're voting on a line item for special education. That's why it's called the special education.
Coming from this fund would have to go through town meeting.
Correct. It has to be
For-
voted.
And for that specific purpose.
Correct.
Okay.
It's the only process in the school committee process and budgeting process between FinCom, Board of Selectmen, Mike, myself, and town meeting, where town meeting controls on the recommendation that the funds should be coming from that and not somewhere else.
The only problem I have with it is that putting money into that fund is coming out of the same bucket of funds where we don't have any money anyway.
Yes.
And what
So-
it actually looks like, we're augmenting the school budget with an end-around run, putting money in a different area, so it doesn't look like you have 27 million, but you got 27 million in whatever we put into stabilization. We already have a stabilization fund. As a matter of fact, I don't know if we're gonna have the $395,000. That may have to come out of the stabilization fund.
Right, so I
Right
would counter with two things. This is my fifth budget proposal with you. For 4 years, I know that I haven't come before you to offset a special education situation.
No,
So
but
this,
You have come before us and asked for augmentation to your budget.
correct, supplemental budget in the fall. We have, but that supplemental budget wasn't specific to 8 kids are all of a sudden receiving specialized services. They were supplemental in terms of materials and supplies in 1 year, where I said to you folks, I'm cutting X number of dollars, I will be back in the fall, which is basically what I've done every year that I've been here. They haven't augmented those supplementals have been about, there's 2,500 kids to educate, and materials and supplies are a concern, or curriculum was a concern. It hasn't been this student's placement, this student's placement, this student's placement has actually absorbed what we predicted would be the number that we would need to not have to come back. I think there's a big difference between the two. Now, I agree with you, Mr. DeLuca, that A, it's going to be looked at by some that, well, there's their little kitty, that's number one, or two, that it's just, oh, really, they have $28,500,000 because they're just going to play the game. I think that the way this is being set up is that we have to prove, not only to the FinCom and then town meeting, that, I'll give you a perfect example. If tomorrow morning a case at $300,000 walks through the door, right, and we budgeted $300,000, I think that most of us in this room can say, oh, it's September, it's July 1st, we have this student for $365, residential, psychological, you name it, one-to-one nurse, one-to-one para, overnight nurse, overnight para, we own the whole cost. And how did we know that on February 15th when the budget was due, May 1st when I presented to you, and May 14th when I went to town meeting?
Yes, Aaron.
Hey, Joe, so it seems like the goal here is to kind of be able to steady the ship with the plans you want to be able to make, and just, and you won't be able to use these funds without showing people the unexpected hit and where that came from and why, and why you need those funds right now. Because I'm guessing if you went and stood before a town meeting and said, our 2016, 2017, 2018 numbers were X, and our 2019 numbers are X plus 1, people would say, well, that, that's $1 more. You don't need to be pulling money out of that account. You would have to be able to, you would be able to show us that this was just as you've showed us here tonight, with you
I
know,
don't-
outlining each of these
I don't know
cases.
the
You're
last
standing behind-
superintendent who came
you're gonna
before
stand-
you.
You're standing in front of town meeting.
I don't know
Give a similar kind of presentation and say, look, this is what we just got hit with, this is why we need this money.
I don't know the last time you've seen something like this, if ever.
All right.
And I'm more than willing to share it every single year. I can't give you, I choose not to give you the placements because I think that targets individuals, and I'm not going to give you names or dates of birth or any of that. But a placement of a student is something that internally we know, and the fact of the matter is, regardless, you know that if they're less costly, they're probably public and not private and so on. If you know that 6 figures, they could potentially be residential because it actually notes the number of days as well. But I have to tell you, and I appreciate the comment, I do think that there's also another big difference. I would argue, and this could be an argument that I'm making for you folks not to support our supplemental here for this case. I'm asking for $395,000, let's say, again, we use the minus 104. You know, every time I've asked for a supplemental budget, we've done what we've said, except for once. Except for once. You could say I lied to you once, if you wanted to put it that way. And that was this fall, when I said I needed $100,000 for materials and supplies, and in November I froze the budget. That's the only time you can tell me I haven't said this is what it's for. This money will go directly to offset this budget. The other discussion, 2 parts that are important is, I would argue, and Mike, you can disagree with me, but stabilization as a community is a big deal. Specialization, stabilization as special ed is a different deal, and I'll tell you how. One, I know impacts potentially your bond rating and all that stuff. The other one does not. The stabilization account for special education is literally actually going to be seen as a positive for the community because you're trying to financially deal with it. Mr. DeLuca is correct. At what point are we going to be able to say, you know, that we're not taking from the general fund that goes to everybody because we're offsetting special education? Well, really and I'll defer to him to his comments, but my view of that comment is, when are we going to stop having general education pay for special education circumstances that we cannot control? That's the real discussion. And you do not want to become the community where your parents are out in the street doing this. It's your fault while the AP program's been cut, because I got to pay for that. That can happen and does happen in communities.
I have no argument with you, what you're trying to say. The only thing I'm saying is that I don't care what you call it, where you put it, it's all coming out of the same bucket of free cash.
Agreed.
Whether we give it to you in your general budget or we find it someplace else. Unfortunately, we don't have it. If we did, we wouldn't be standing here tonight, you wouldn't be standing here tonight looking for $395,000. Because you would have already gotten it if we had enough money to give you a budget that you needed.
I don't agree with that statement, and I'll tell you why. Because I budgeted $200,000.
Yeah.
I utilized that money. I budgeted that based upon 4 years of data and information. This storm came out of nowhere that's requiring the 395 negative. I think that's the difference.
But the difference is if we had it, we'd be giving it to you anyway. And we're going to have to give it to you if you've already incurred it. If you've encumbered these expenses, there's no way the town's going to default on it.
Correct.
And I'm sure that at the end of the year, when you balance your books, okay, if you have $2 left over, it goes into the general fund as free cash.
Right.
So, you know, I'm not questioning the fact that you don't need the money and it isn't encumbered, okay? And there's no way that we cannot give it to you. It's where we're gonna get it from is the only question, okay? And it'll probably, I don't know, I'm just guessing, my opinion, it'll probably have to come out of stabilization. That's the only fund we have with the ability to handle a $395,000 hit.
Right. So I'm glad that we're on the same page in general. I guess my issue is, if you have an account that you can't control, my premise for putting this to the school committee, to you folks, and potentially to town meeting is simply an idea that may be able to work when and if funding, you know, is prioritized and or available. Because not doing anything means we continue to just be where we are. And to me, that makes sense. And it throws all the authority to the town meeting, right? That's there. As you know, there's always this debate that goes on about line items on this side and bottom numbers on that side. This is, it's gone. It goes to town meeting just for this, and we have to sit in front of you folks and then the town meeting and prove that these were circumstances we couldn't control.
Paul?
Yeah, there's one other point that maybe, may or may not be relevant to this, but what I discovered, I think the last time I did my round as chairman, and was involved in discussion with, you know, one of these telephone things with bond people in New York and so forth, I discovered that as far as they were concerned, our capital improvements fund was identical to our stabilization account. In other words, we've already set up a second stabilization account, which is earmarked for only one purpose. Now what we would be doing is setting up a third one that would be earmarked for only one purpose with the same authority. It has to go to town meeting, it has to pass by a 2/3 vote, all of that kind of thing. And in terms of their view, that is the bond people's view of us, it didn't matter. We were sort of pleased to learn that they regarded us as in better shape than we thought we were at that point, because they were counting both our capital improvements fund and our stabilization fund as part of our reserves that we'd put aside for reserves. This, in the sense we're doing, would be the same thing. Again, it would be like capital improvements in that it could be only for that. And this stabilization would be only for that. Our general stabilization can be for anything, including those two things, which is what Tom is saying. That if we, you know, where would we, if we had suddenly now had to come up with the money, what's the one fund we could draw on? If we can find a way to establish this, given what I've seen over many years in the history of special education costs and how they go and how they're just totally uncontrollable, it seems to me, practically.
And there is absolute.
It makes some sense. If there's any department, any part of a department that needs some stabilization reserves, it probably is special education.
Mike, you were going to make a comment?
I was just kind of, when Aaron was talking about his scenario, it would be the same scenario going to the stabilization fund. So, you know, something maybe we could look at, but I don't see why the scenario you talked about isn't the same scenario using our stabilization fund.
Okay, Steve?
One thing I do see different, in this policy, and I guess we have to vote the policy, it always says there has to be a minimum.
That's another question. Do we put this off until the selectmen and school committee and finance committee develop a policy and then come back in the fall and do this?
As this is written now, says there always has to be at least 100,000 in this stabilization account. So I'm kind of in the same, we already have that stabilization account to set up another one. I think it's just repeating the process. Now, money gets voted in at town hall based on what the needs are, and then expense for that purpose. But the expense portion of that, pulling funds out, town doesn't vote on that part of it itself. It's the school committee or the fiscal policy that dictates when the funds will come out. Is that, and then
Town takes it
hall.
out, but it takes
Town
out.
Meeting.
Town meeting. Yeah.
The town takes it out, but the town decides.
Matter of fact, since I've been here, we've only hit the stabilization fund once, and that was for the Yale School with we uncovered asbestos when they were replacing some pipes.
Correct.
Okay? You know,
Oh, boy.
yeah. So, but, yeah, that's basically the same thing. That was,
okay.
Bill?
Bill?
I have many questions, but I'll keep it to two. So, what happens if at town meeting you don't get 2/3 vote? Then what happens?
It doesn't pass.
I know it doesn't pass, but
It doesn't pass, and
we've already
you're in
spent the
default.
money.
You're in default, and then I guess you're looking at your stabilization account. You're looking at a separate account for that. It's my understanding, I'll defer to Mike, and I understand where Michael's coming from this, and your comment as well. This is an account that my concern is that if you have some luck and you're putting some money into it, you could have it at a point where you haven't had a $395,000 surprise in quite a while, right? So, And part of that is because, you know, if you're you got to remember, these are mandates that the state isn't funding at 75%. That's part of the problem. The difference between the 72% that we're potentially getting is 104, 75 is 149. That makes the number even look better on our end. They were supposed to be funding that at 75. They play with that every single year. We are moving monies for everything you can think of in the Commonwealth right now. If I have to retweet out another tweet from the governor's office about yet another 1.5 million for this and 1.5 million for that, and I get that. But the money to fund Circuit Breaker this year at 75% is there. It's sitting, it's there. It's just we need to get the elected officials to say 72 isn't enough, 75 is what we need.
See, my concern is, as Tom kind of indicated, is that there will be a segment of the population who's going to say, well, if we give you this in this special fund, then you need to take away from your general budget. So
It's all perception.
yeah, so that's kind of what I'm trying to figure out. But Mike, what is our stabilization account at this point?
Our balance now. Let me find it. $1,733,485.
Yeah. Dr. Byetta, if I may, and if I can, Rick.
Yeah.
Why isn't some of this covered by health insurance?
In very limited cases, it is. In most cases, it is not. It's just the way the game has been set up. There is no answer. I mean, we've sat around at every round table you can think of. I know that Mike's association has done the same thing. You know, our associations actually don't always agree on things, but this is one of the ones where we're both going, what are we waiting for? You know, the way to deal with this issue, and I'm sorry I forgot it, but Link, do you have that specialist paraprofessionals all the way through OTPT for next year? No, you don't have a. Just that cost alone for us, in my opinion, every single bit of what my OTs, PTs, psychologists, speech pathologists should all be reimbursed through the Medicare process. All of it. We should be offsetting 40% of those people's salaries every year with that amount of money, right? And we don't have it. Both associations have filed bills asking that this become the #1 issue and the #1 change, and it never happens. And there's arguments against it. You know, one of the arguments against it is we're going to drive up the cost of healthcare. So all we're going to see is an absorption of the cost somewhere else. I'm not smart enough to know that.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Did you mention other districts have practiced this?
Yes, there are. I can get you a list of the districts that actually practice or have established stabilizations. And I also know from a meeting before April vacation of the number of districts that are putting this before them. I believe one of them is a local district, actually. Easton.
And they could show the results, how it's.
In some cases, the ones that have been in place, I can make a couple of phone calls and say, when did you start your stabilization count? How much did you start it with? Where is it? How have you used it? When have you used it? Have you used it? I can absolutely make I know Link and I, between the two of us, get to business managers and get that information for you, if you'd like to have that.
That'd be helpful.
Okay.
Yep.
I can see the benefit to having it and not having it. Right now, I see if we create a separate fund, it's basically doing the exact same thing that the stabilization fund is doing, because it's the exact same thing. And as Tom mentioned, it's the same pocket. We could take money out of stabilization and put it into the special education stabilization, and it's just doing the same thing, from a different pocket, really. So what's the advantage of having a separate fund where you can already draw on the bigger fund if you have.
Well, I don't come from a philosophy or a background or a deep-rooted philosophy that stabilization accounts are something that we should be just going into on a regular basis, because it's my understanding that a townwide stabilization account does have some significant attachment to what your bond rating is. So those are very critical votes that you have to take. I think this one is very significant, although it can be seen as a very positive thing for the community because it's thinking about its fiscal situation when there are emergencies in a scenario that I have no control over. I think that's I know in the community I live in, going in stabilization is something that's done. It needs to be pouring rain in order to happen. It has to be that bill that wasn't paid, if you will. So it depends, and I agree. Listen, I'm not suggesting that I have an answer of where the money's coming from. I'm simply suggesting that if there's a potential for us to create something that stops us from going into your traditional stabilization account, I don't think that that's bad fiscal management. That's not my decision to make. That's yours and then the town meeting. And I defer to Michael and his comments earlier as the town manager.
Now, if this did pass at town meeting, so what would happen next? I mean, would there be another vote? Would it be voted originally with a set sum of money, or will there have to be another?
Right. So if you want to, it's my understanding, if you want to change the set of money, there's a potential that I think you can probably not have a minimum of 100,000 and have a different number. I can get that answer for you as well. We used 100,000 because that is the number that's being used over and over and over again, as established by communities. But I can look into that and defer to Mike on that question as well.
And then when would the ability to draw funds out of it begin?
It could begin as soon as your policy is in place and into the next fiscal year if you needed to, depending on how much money is there and how much is needed.
But right now, there are no policies.
Right, well, I mean, in our recommendation to you, we've established a financial reserve policy as part of that, that's noted there, but it defers to Michael, the Board of Selectmen, as well, to establish that process, if you will. So I wouldn't be able to move the school committee wouldn't be able to request a fund transfer until all of that is in place. So you could take Michael's answer of, let's get all the three boards together, finalize that, then go to the town meeting in the fall and have it done. Potentially there's maybe $25,000 of free cash available and you start it with $25,000 and you get something in there, or not.
Yes, Paul.
I'm sorry. Well, but all I was trying to point out before was that we may not have a written policy, but we have a de facto policy from the day we set up a separate capital improvements account, which it turns out the bond rating analysts look at as another stabilization account as part of our reserves. So in fact, and I'm not arguing this for or against your particular proposal, but in fact, we have had a policy in place that went beyond a single stabilization fund for how many years? A good many.
I guess what I'm suggesting to you is the following. You're $260,000 in the FY19 budget of eliminating any money going towards general education because of uncontrollable expenses in another line item.
Yeah.
At some point, that's going to have to stop. Next year, you could be in a totally different situation. You absorb the $300,000, you have your costs for mandates, and you're not even supporting one penny in your budget to general education. And that's the reason for looking at something so significant, that it establishes something, a line item controlled by a body that would get evidence, not only your body here, but the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, the town meeting, that says, when you have a $395,000 surprise and you've absorbed every scenario that you can think of without having to go into other departments or line items, including your transfer accounts that I know the FinCom has and stuff like that, that this account is something that you could say, okay, well, it's the end of the year, we're going to zero out the finance committee's transfer account at $100,000, and we're going to take the other $100,000 from the stabilization account. Now you haven't had to take it from an operating budget in the following fiscal year. You're not going into, jumping around like that. You're not having to go into a huge amount of money into free cash to move into it. and so forth. It's an idea, it's a proposal. I got it from other districts that have had success with it, other districts that are putting it forth this year, and I will, Mr. Chairman, reserve getting you that information about how it's used, who's using it, and how they've been dapping into it or not. And I can probably get that turned around in about a week's time. I don't know when you're meeting again, but I can get it to you
We'll be
ASAP
meeting,
through Mike.
Twice a week.
All right, so I'll get it to Mike. As soon as I get a bunch of answers, I'll just share whatever those answers are with you.
Just a final question from me, is the 104,000 on June 30th, cross your fingers?
Yeah, it's the fourth quarter billing, which comes around June.
Okay. That's going to be dedicated circuit.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
It's circuit breaker
Yeah,
money, so it's
right,
going into that
right.
account.
Okay, so it's 291, 375.
Truth in charging.
291, 375. We talked earlier, you said 81% of your total budget is encumbered, so it'd be about 22 million.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's about 1.83 a month. So is there any way that you could find that 291?
Absolutely not. Not without layoffs between now and June, and they'd have to be pretty significant. I mean, there just
Maybe we could
isn't
make it
money.
up in the fall? I mean, is there any way we could?
How do I defer bills that are due on the 30th of June?
All right, I'm just trying
I
to
mean,
think.
if tomorrow morning the bills for utilities come in $20,000 less, I could always, make
Oh.
sure that you have knowledge of that and how it worked.
I guess I was just thinking about, Steve brought up policy and
Right.
that thing. Maybe kind of formulate something on the front end and then, go from there.
I just had,
Yep.
just one more statement is, if in fact they have any extra money at the end of the year, unless they're gonna plan a trip to Bermuda, it's gonna come back as free cash,
Correct.
and we'll get the 300,000 back. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna have yield till they know what they're doing with their budget.
Yeah,
I'm sure you're not getting $300,000 back.
I know that. but-
I mean, this is.
Just going on record,
I'm not
Mr.
going to
DeLuca.
Bermuda either.
If I go on Bermuda, I can guarantee you it's on my dole, not yours. Although I thank you for my salary.
This is your first request, the fall. Everything else has always been in the fall. your
Right.
requests. So
Right.
this is your real first.
It is, listen, I don't take it lightly at all, with all due respect to my dear friend Tom, coming in front of him without saying, holy cow, I have to go in front of Tom and the board about, I need more money, because I know exactly how he feels about it. But this is a perfect storm situation. It is a situation where you have these 8 situations at as much as $167,000. How could you have known about this when I met with you, when you voted aye at town meeting? There's no way we could have known that. And we absorbed some of that cost already. I mean, I just told you earlier, thank you for $100,000. I lied to you. I had to use that, I absorbed that money into bringing this number down.
Okay. Bob, do you have a question? Comment.
Without getting myself in too much trouble, it's no doubt in my mind that the $395,000 is necessary. I mean, special ed has been a lion, part of our problem for years and years and years in this town. Even back in my days in the Finance Committee, it was always that big bear in the background that we never knew what the hell it was going to be. And you can't predict it. You can plan it, you can put that money aside, and then suddenly a family moves into town with an issue that we, again, don't know what kind of an issue it is until we deal with the issue itself. But the problem is not at the town level, it's the mandates that continue to come down from the state level. And as much as we try to come up with plans on how to raise this money, in this particular case this year, based on the enrollment, the additional enrollment, it's a problem. There's nothing we can do about it. We're already strapped on money that we have in our budgets to begin with. We're down to the bone. Town does not have the appetite for an override. That's not going to happen. And I don't think anybody in this room is interested in even going down that road for a while to come. So we have to live within our means. The problem is, when we spend money like this, we're cutting into next year's and the year after. We continue to cut and cut and cut. And we have to fulfill our obligations this year in order to deal with, it's like we can't look forward ever. We're always looking behind ourselves, trying to figure out how we're going to take care of this stuff. If the state ever gets the appetite, and I know politically, senators and state reps aren't inclined to ever touch anything that has to do with special education. But when the school system is mandated to take care of people, most of our graduates are 18, 19 years old. We have people, we're in our system to the 22. And the question has always been in my mind, why? We have an obligation to educate these people. At the age of 18, if they still need additional, what they should be getting is specialized training, perhaps to do something more, become more of a factor in the community. The state should step in at that point and say, okay, we have mandated programs where they pick up the price at that point. But no, we're paying for it. We're still sending them to school, hoping they're getting something out of it. They're not getting much of anything out of it. They should be trained on how to do something to fit in with society. And it's not happening. And until the state does that, we're never going to catch up. We can't. The $395 is necessary. There's no question about it. Circuit breaker, we can talk about. You know, we do, I mean, the stabilization, we can talk about that. We do have a stabilization account. We were fortunate enough a couple of years ago to throw a few extra dollars back into that. But it's been a long time. And if we take money out of that, for whatever reason, we're going to end up, again, bringing it down to a level where, yeah, it can impact that bond issue, but, you know, we're at a point in the game right now where we can't borrow any money anyway, so it doesn't matter. You know, so the stabilization account we need to talk about probably is the three of us. We need to come up with a plan on that. But I think more importantly, somehow we have to figure out a way to start getting a message back to the state that, you know what, we can't do this anymore. It's ridiculous. And it's totally out of control. That's my 5 cents worth.
To the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, thank you for your comments. Based on that and Mike's prior comments, I'll request that the school committee take this off the table for the town meeting and allow for the FinCom, Board of Selectmen, and school committee to work on it in the summer into the fall and come back at the fall town meeting with a proposal to the FinCom. How's that? And in that way, we can come potentially unified, maybe even come the three boards together, come to a unified, where would the money come from? How do we think it should be done? And that's at least puts us all on the same page. I would urge that the two boards work together. I can't speak for my school committee, but I'll speak to them on my next meeting, which is May 7th. Thanks, Peter. May 7th, and see if they will be willing to withdraw it at this time, pending that we come back in the fall.
Well, it'd still be helpful to get that information.
We will still share all that information with you.
That's
Not a
right.
problem. And they may say, no, we would like to move on it still and take a yay or nay vote.
When do you think for sure you'll know if you get the 100 before? 'Cause
Well,
we can move a number.
we've made 2 phone calls to DESI today alone, and prior to that. We do have communications, and Mike, I know, was part of that at one time, from Jay Barrows, who actually called my cell and said, you got the 72%. And we did get a number. It's just a matter of my getting something from them that says it's definitely in the 4th quarter. That's when you're going to see it. And it is at an increase. And as soon as I get something that makes me committed, I'll share that with Mike as well in writing so that you can have it and you can feel more comfortable before the town meeting.
That's fine.
And if it increases, I'll inform you of that as well. What's the score in the game?
2-2. Not that,
I mean,
He's been really into this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Next one. Okay. All right, from that.
so for the next meeting, if we could address the retirement expense we should have for you. And we could do the Articles 24 and 25, OPEB and stabilization. And we should be able to take care of any of the special town meeting issues, hopefully. And just, I gave you, so you're up to date on the free cash, I gave you 2 sheets. The first sheet shows you where we started with free cash at $1,444,921.78. Our snow and ice, we're finally over, will be $134,400. That will be in the budget supplement article. Then we'll use $600,000 for next year's budget. Will bring us down to $734. And then articles that are being funded, are the $25,000 you already voted on for the tree service, and the other one to be confirmed is the separation expense would be $7,090. So that will leave us with $678,431 in free cash. And
Is that again? How much?
$678,431.78. And then just on the next page, just showing you some of the things that we have to keep an eye on. We've obviously cut the police, fire, and communications overtime so that we could provide a budget with a balanced budget with a 3% increase for the schools and a 1.5 for the town side. So if you take that out, would be down to $394,887.78. Then snow and ice, we always hold $300,000 to be on the safe side for the next year, and then we'll be looking at using $600,000 for our operating budget in '20 and the capital commitment payments that we have of $191,000. So obviously, we're looking that hopefully we're going to have free cash to add to this in the fall, but if we didn't have anything, we'd be in the deficit, $696,112.22 going into the next budget cycle. All right.
Any questions for Mike? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Mike. All right, I think we'll... Willie,
See you tomorrow.
Mike?
we don't
Mike,
have the
was
minutes.
2-2 an accurate number, or were you just kidding? I said, was 2-2 an accurate score, or were you just kidding?
No argument.
I did. Thank you.
I'd like to, does everyone have a copy of the annual report?
I read it, it's very good.
Okay, that Bill had presented, and maybe we can review that and vote on that as well. Thought it was very good.
Who writes it?
So good. You have to give the, when you have to make a copy of your report for the town book.
Is that right?
That.
Right. Is that right, 16 times? Is this 16 times?
That's what Barney gave.
That's 16 times present, right? And then we have May 2nd, April 30th, May 2nd, 7th, and 9th, right?
I think I included those in the
You did
16.
include the-
And I included the meeting before special town meeting. because
Okay.
we-
Did you include the 9th too? Because we're going to meet probably at the 9th now.
Yes, I did not include April 30th. I didn't think we had a meeting next Monday,
Yeah, we are.
so there may be 17.
Yeah, okay.
You think we're gonna be?
I can count it again if you want.
Mike just informed me probably we'll be meeting the 9th, and I didn't include the 9th on the tentative schedule that I sent out earlier, so I just
If I
wanted...
had,
Yeah, so I just thought maybe it'll be 18 times.
And we'll meet on the 14th.
I don't
Right,
think
there
anyone's
you go.
gonna come back
Monday,
demanding
Wednesday
an
from
account.
now on.
Yeah,
Yep. And then
so that'll be a total of 19 times.
Right.
You in agreement on that?
Yeah.
Everyone, Barney, you got? And,
make a motion, we accept the report submitted by Bill
Okay, so,
for the annual town meeting.
Second.
okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none?
We,
Yes, I'm sorry?
Mr. Chairman, I think there was a comment made by Walter, who's not here, via email. Have we addressed that?
Oh, no, I had sent that to Mike for follow-up.
Okay,
So if you want to table that till he comes back, I did do that.
okay.
Well, when is this needed
We'll
by?
be meeting Monday, and that should be fine. If we vote on it Monday, that'd be fine. So,
It's just the one guy who kind of.
yeah, right, Walter, yeah, right. Good point. Yeah, he stepped up.
Away on other business.
Yep,
so I
okay,
think
so why don't we table this till Monday, and we'll hopefully get that.
I withdraw my motion.
request. Okay, second, very good. Okay,
Thank you.
yep. The minutes, no minutes, as I was gonna say. For tonight, we'll address those on Monday as well. So, I think that will conclude. Anyone have any final comments or business?
Motion to
Okay.
adjourn.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous.